Before we dive in, if you love epic tales of war, strategy, hit that subscribe and like button, turn on notifications, and join our growing legion of warriors. Now, let's begin. Imagine a vast intergalactic council chamber, where representatives of the oldest, most powerful civilizations in the universe gather to discuss matters of cosmic importance. These beings, many of whom had long abandoned their original forms, for synthetic immortality, had seen countless species rise from the dust, reach for the stars, and then vanish into obscurity. They were the architects of empires, the overseers of galactic stability, the masters of technologies so advanced they defied comprehension. To them, power was measured in aeons, and the idea that a young species could ever challenge their supremacy was nothing more than a joke. And so, when humanity finally made its presence known to the galaxy, the reaction was predictable. Laughter. Our first contact had been diplomatic, tentative, and, to the great powers of the galaxy, embarrassingly naive. We sent emissaries eager to establish peaceful relations, sharing our scientific achievements with pride, as if our fledgling understanding of the universe was anything more than a child's scribbles compared to their libraries of infinite knowledge. The Council of Supreme Races, a coalition of the most advanced species, barely even acknowledged us. Some of them did not bother responding at all. Others sent condescending messages, welcoming us like a parent, humoring a toddler who had just learned to walk. Among them were the Shivatra, a species that had ruled the galactic core for over 1,000,000 years. To them, war was primitive. They had evolved beyond the need for fleets, beyond physical combat itself. Their battles were fought in the realm of pure thought, hacking enemy systems, rewriting the laws of physics, bending reality to their will. To them, humanity wasn't even worth the effort. Then there was the Zorvash Dominion, an empire forged in the fires of endless war. Their fleets were monstrous, each warship a floating fortress armed with weapons that could crack planets in half. They had crushed countless civilizations under their heel, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. When they first heard of humanity, they didn't see us as equals. They didn't see us as rivals. They saw us as a resource, a species to be conquered, enslaved, and broken. For years, the galaxy watched us from a distance, chuckling at our primitive fusion drives, our slow, awkward ships, our tiny sphere of influence barely extending past our home system. They saw the way we squabbled among ourselves, the wars that defined our history, the divisions that kept us from uniting as one species. And so, the consensus was made. Humanity was insignificant. If we were wise, we would accept our place. If we were foolish enough to resist, we would be wiped out. But what the galaxy didn't know, what no alien empire, no all-seeing intelligence, no ancient civilization had foreseen, was that humanity was playing a very different game. Yes, they had seen our public fleets. The ships we displayed in diplomatic meetings, the fragile colonies we built in full view of the galactic community. They had seen our scientific vessels, our deep space research stations, our exploratory missions venturing timidly beyond our solar system. But they had not seen what we had been building in the shadows. For decades, our greatest minds had worked in secrecy, developing technologies far beyond what we allowed the galaxy to see. In the depths of space, hidden in the black void where no prying eyes could reach, we had constructed a war fleet unlike anything the universe had ever known. Every mistake in our history, every war we had fought, every battle we had lost, had been studied, analyzed, and used to forge a military force that would not just win battles, it would ensure our survival. And so, when the Zorvash Dominion finally grew tired of watching and launched their invasion, they did so with absolute confidence. Their warships, each the size of entire cities, their hulls layered in armor forged from neutron star alloys, approached Sol without hesitation. In their minds, this was not a battle. This was an extermination. The same extermination they had performed on 100 other civilizations before us. Their fleets entered our system like a swarm of locusts, moving with the cold precision of a species that had done this countless times before. They bypassed our outer defenses without concern, brushing aside our long-range missiles like they were nothing. They had seen humanity's public defenses, and they had already dismissed them as irrelevant. But then, something happened. As the Zorvash fleets moved deeper into our system, an energy surge rippled through the void. a signal so powerful that, for a brief moment, it disrupted their long-range scanners. Their commanders hesitated, their minds struggling to comprehend the readings. This was not in their predictions. This was not how exterminations were supposed to go. And then, from the darkness beyond Pluto's orbit, humanity's true battle fleet emerged. Not the fragile, outdated ships the galaxy had mocked. Not the slow, clumsy vessels the Zorvash had dismissed, but something else entirely. Ships that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. Vessels with armor that absorbed energy instead of breaking under fire. Weapons that unleashed devastation on a scale no alien mind had ever conceived. The galaxy had laughed at humanity. But in that moment, as the first shots were fired and the real battle began, the laughter stopped, and in its place was fear. For a fleeting moment, the void of space was silent. The Zorvash fleet, which had approached Sol with arrogant certainty, now found itself frozen in hesitation. Their commanders, veterans of 1,000 planetary conquests, stared at their displays, struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. Humanity's battle fleet had arrived, but it wasn't anything they had predicted. The first anomaly was the sheer scale of it. By all recorded intelligence, humanity's largest ships were no bigger than standard galactic cruisers. The vessels they now faced, however, dwarfed even the Dominion's own dreadnoughts. These warships, forged in the deepest, most secretive shipyards of the Terran military-industrial complex, were titanic. Their hulls, layered in an alloy the Dominion scientists couldn't even identify, absorbed light in a way that made them look like moving shadows, predators lurking in the abyss. But it wasn't just their size that sent a shiver through the Zorvash ranks. It was their formation, their precision. The Dominion had always prided itself on discipline, on war fleets that moved with terrifying coordination. And yet, as their tactical computers analyzed the human fleet's positioning, they detected something chilling. These ships weren't just well organized, they were flawless. Every vessel moved in perfect synchronicity, with no wasted motion, no hesitation, no vulnerabilities in their lines. It was as if they had already predicted every possible maneuver the Dominion could attempt. This was not a fleet cobbled together from the scraps of a young civilization. This was something else. Something designed for a singular purpose: domination. The Dominion's commander, High Warlord Krasvar, snarled in contempt. He had faced resistance before. He had seen desperate species cling to hope, only to be shattered under the might of the Dominion's war machine. He was not about to be intimidated by an upstart race. "Advance," he ordered. The Zorvash fleet surged forward, weapons primed, energy cannons charging. The plan was simple: overwhelm the enemy with sheer firepower. No civilization had ever withstood the first assault of a Dominion fleet. Humanity would be no different. The first wave of plasma lances screamed through the void, streaking toward the human warships at near-light speed. But then, something impossible happened. The plasma bolts never struck their targets. Instead, they curved, warped off course as if space itself had been altered. The Zorvash watched in disbelief as their weapons twisted away, vanishing into the blackness, or fizzling into nothing. Some projectiles bent so sharply that they looped around and struck the Dominion's own ships, detonating against their shields. Krasvar's blood ran cold. "What is this trickery?" he roared. But there was no trickery. There was only technology. Technology so advanced that to the Dominion it may as well have been sorcery. Humanity had cracked the code of battlefield physics, manipulating gravitational forces to create localized distortions. Their warships didn't need shields in the traditional sense. They bent reality itself, redirecting attacks like water flowing around an unbreakable rock. Then, humanity struck back. At first, the Dominion sensors didn't even detect the attack. There were no visible energy signatures, no bright flashes of weapons fire. But suddenly, ships in the Zorvash fleet began to rupture, silent explosions tearing through their hulls as if invisible blades had sliced them apart. Entire dreadnoughts shuddered, their reinforced armor splitting open like paper. Their crews sucked into the vacuum before they even knew they were dead. The Dominion's officers panicked, desperately trying to identify the source of the assault. Their sensors detected nothing: no heat, no radiation, no missile trajectories. The human fleet had fired weapons that left no trace. Only later, in the aftermath of the battle, would the truth become clear? Humanity had long abandoned traditional ballistics. Their warships deployed kinetic harpoons accelerated to near-relativistic speeds, slivers of dense, exotic matter so fast that by the time they reached their targets, they were virtually undetectable. These projectiles didn't just pierce armor, they turned entire sections of enemy ships into vaporized mist. The Zorvash fleet reeled from the devastation, but High Warlord Krasvar was not so easily broken. He had seen allies fall before. He had witnessed entire armadas reduced to rubble, only for the Dominion to rise stronger. He still had numbers, still had ships. Hundreds of them. He gritted his fangs and issued a new command. Deploy the behemoths. From the core of the Zorvash fleet, 3 monstrous warships emerged, each one a relic of the Dominion's might. These were no ordinary battleships, they were world killers, each one large enough to eclipse a small moon. Their hulls had survived. Neutron star collisions, their weapons could unleash destruction on a planetary scale. Each behemoth carried enough firepower to reduce Earth to a cinder within seconds. Their arrival sent a clear message. The real battle had just begun. Humanity's fleet adjusted instantly, repositioning with inhuman efficiency. They did not flee. They did not hesitate. It was clear now. These ships were not just commanded by humans. They were guided by something more. The Dominion had always considered artificial intelligence to be a weakness. Their war machines were operated by living minds driven by instinct, by passion. But humanity had embraced something else, an evolution of warfare itself. Their fleets were not merely piloted. They were synchronized with a tactical network beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. A fusion of human intuition and machine precision, an intelligence that anticipated every possible outcome and adjusted accordingly. To the Dominion, it was terrifying. The behemoths opened fire. Hundreds of energy lances erupted at once, each blast powerful enough to obliterate a city. They targeted the human fleet with overwhelming force, determined to erase this defiance before it spread. And yet, the human warships moved. Not like ordinary vessels, not like anything the Zorvash had ever encountered. They didn't dodge in predictable patterns. They twisted and warped through space in ways that defied all logic. Some appeared to vanish entirely for fractions of a second, reappearing elsewhere. Others seemed to flicker between dimensions, avoiding destruction with impossible grace. And then, without warning, the counterattack began. From the human fleet, dark shapes launched into the void. They weren't missiles. They weren't drones. They were something entirely new. Living weapons. Self-adaptive swarms, each one a network of thousands of autonomous machines, shifting and evolving mid-flight. The moment they struck the behemoths, they didn't just explode. They burrowed, embedding themselves into the Dominion's most prized warships, rewriting their systems, turning their own technology against them. Krasvar watched in horror as his behemoths, symbols of the Dominion's unstoppable might, began to fall apart. Their weapons turned silent. Their engines stuttered. Their hulls, once invincible, crumbled as human-crafted parasites ate them from the inside. For the first time in Zorvash history, their greatest warships were being dismantled, not by an ancient enemy, not by a superior galactic power, but by the very species they had once dismissed as a joke. And as the first behemoth ruptured, exploding in a silent wave of light, the laughter that had once echoed across the galaxy had become a scream. For the first time in the Dominion's history, true panic swept through their ranks. Across the Zorvash fleet, officers and crew who had once sneered at the idea of humanity putting up a fight now struggled to comprehend what was happening. The first behemoth, a vessel the Dominion had relied upon for planetary sieges and interstellar intimidation, was now little more than drifting wreckage. The second was collapsing from within, its hull breached by an unseen force that spread like a virus, eating through its systems at an impossible rate. The third behemoth, however, still stood. Its shields flickered, struggling against the unseen terror that had consumed its counterparts. High Warlord Krasvar, his face twisted in rage and disbelief, slammed his claws into his command chair, bellowing a single order across the Dominion's fleet. All remaining ships, converge, exterminate them! The Zorvash forces moved as one, their thousands of warships pulling into tight battle formations, adopting the Dominion's deadliest strategy, the Iron Maw. This tactic had crushed civilizations before, creating an inescapable wall of ships that funneled enemies into a death zone of overlapping firepower. Every Dominion victory had been sealed with this maneuver. It was a strategy perfected over millennia, a formation that no species had ever escaped. But the humans, they didn't even attempt to flee. Instead, their fleet responded with an eerie confidence. Their massive warships repositioned in an instant, not through conventional thrust maneuvers, but as if space itself bent to their will. It was not just speed, it was precision on a level that defied every known law of engagement. Then came the second shock. The largest human warship, a Leviathan of unknown class, moved forward, breaking formation to face the final behemoth directly. The Dominion's sensors struggled to scan it. Every attempt to read its mass, composition, or energy output returned conflicting data. It was as if the ship was shifting between states of reality, its form undefined, a silhouette against the void. And then, it spoke. Not through radio waves, not through conventional communication, but directly into the minds of every single Zorvash aboard their ships. A voice, deep and commanding, yet unmistakably human, resonated in their thoughts. You thought us weak because we were silent. You mocked us because we stayed in the shadows. You assumed that because we did not expand like parasites we were prey. But you never asked the most important question. Why? Krasvar's hands trembled. The words were not simply heard. They were felt, reverberating through his very being. This was no mere transmission. It was something far worse. Humanity had achieved the impossible. They had weaponized thought itself. The great warship's hull began to glow, not with the artificial light of energy shielding, but with something more primal. The very fabric of space distorted around it. The Zorvash fleet opened fire, every remaining warship unleashing their combined firepower. A storm of plasma, antimatter warheads, and gravitational imploders surged toward the lone human vessel, and it all vanished. Not deflected, not absorbed, but erased. The energy, the mass, the raw destructive force, gone, as if it had never existed. The voice returned, colder this time. We are not bound by your rules. We are not limited by the physics. You believe govern this universe. You call yourselves a Dominion, but you rule nothing. You are nothing. And now, you will learn why we have never feared you. The great warship unleashed its attack. It was not a beam of light, not a projectile, not anything the Dominion could understand. The void itself seemed to ripple, and in an instant, every Zorvash ship in range, hundreds of them, simply ceased to be. No explosions, no wreckage, just nothing. Sensors showed empty space where entire armadas had once been. The Zorvash homeworld, light years away, went dark as its communication network collapsed. Across the galaxy, Dominion-controlled sectors experienced a simultaneous blackout. It wasn't just a battle. It was an erasure. Krasvar gasped, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just occurred. His fleet was gone. The Dominion's legacy, gone. And yet, he remained, floating in the ruined bridge of his flagship, alone in the abyss. A final message echoed in his mind, softer this time. Now you understand. This was never a war. It was a warning, and then silence. Humanity's battle fleet turned, vanishing into the void as suddenly as it had appeared. No pursuit, no further destruction. They had proven their point. They had shown the galaxy what they were truly capable of. And, from that day forward, no one ever laughed at humanity again. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the battle itself. Across what remained of the Dominion's scattered forces, there was no movement, no communication, only the cold realization that they had been utterly defeated. Not in a prolonged war, not through attrition or rebellion, but in a single engagement. The very heart of their military doctrine, the foundation of their belief in their own supremacy, had been shattered beyond repair. Krasvar floated in the remnants of his ruined flagship, his mind still reeling from the final words of the human fleet. This was never a war, it was a warning. A warning for what? The Zorvash Dominion had ruled unchecked for centuries. No species had ever dared challenge them at this scale. The few rebellions that had emerged were crushed before they could gain momentum. Entire civilizations had been exterminated for resisting. And yet, here stood humanity. No, not just standing, but demonstrating a power that defied every known law of war, of physics, of reality itself. The surviving Zorvash ships, scattered and broken, received no orders. No distress signals were sent. Even the remnants of the fleet stationed at the Dominion's core worlds hesitated, their commanders paralyzed with indecision. What could they possibly do now? Then, something even more terrifying happened. The human fleet, now an indistinct shadow on the edges of the Dominion's space, did not pursue them. They did not demand surrender, nor did they broadcast any ultimatums. They simply left. This was not how conquest worked. This was not how war was waged. Empires did not win and walk away. It took days before any official communication resumed within the Dominion, and even then, it was fractured, filled with uncertainty and fear. The surviving warlords convened in a desperate meeting, each attempting to salvage what remained of their once great empire. The question was asked over and over. What do they want? The answer was as unsettling as the battle itself. Nothing. Humanity did not press forward. They did not invade Zorvash space. They did not demand tribute, territory, or even submission. The entire engagement, the sheer devastation wrought upon the Dominion's fleet, had been a singular act of demonstration. A demonstration of power far beyond anything the Zorvash had ever imagined. And then came the final, most horrifying revelation. The Dominion's intelligence agencies had been working frantically, trying to gather any information they could on humanity. The details of their history, their technological advancements, their military doctrine, anything that could explain what had just happened. And the results were terrifying. Humanity had not fielded its full fleet. The ships that had engaged, the Dominion, the ones that had erased their behemoths and scattered their armada, were not even the pinnacle of human military technology. Records showed that these ships, as powerful as they were still part of what humans referred to as their conventional fleet. They were not their ultimate warships. No, those were still hidden. If this was the force humanity used simply to send a warning, what kind of power did they wield when they actually wanted to destroy? The warlords sat in silence as they reviewed the fragmented intelligence. Humanity had developed technology that defied conventional understanding. Their ships moved without propulsion. Their weapons operated without projectiles. Their defensive systems did not deflect attacks. They simply removed them from existence. And yet, despite this overwhelming power, humanity had remained in the shadows for centuries, choosing to watch rather than conquer. It dawned on the Dominion, leadership, that they had never really been the dominant force in the galaxy. They had simply been tolerated until they overstepped. Krasovar, still reeling from the engagement, finally spoke, his voice hollow. "We cannot fight them. We cannot resist them. The only path left," he hesitated, hating the words he was about to say, "is to ensure they never turn their gaze upon us again." For the first time in the history of the Dominion, an official decree was passed. Not one of war, not one of conquest, but one of silence. All records of the engagement were sealed. No messages were sent beyond their borders, no declarations of war, no warnings to other empires. The Dominion would never speak of humanity again. The order was simple: avoid them, never engage, never threaten, because the moment humanity decided to truly unleash its power, the Zorvash Dominion, and perhaps the entire galaxy, would cease to exist. The silence that followed the Dominion's defeat was not just tactical, it was existential. Across the Dominion's core worlds, the very foundation of their civilization trembled beneath the weight of a truth they could scarcely comprehend. For the first time in their long and brutal history, they were not the apex predators of the galaxy. Krasovar, battered and disgraced, had returned to the High Warlords Council, if only because he was one of the few commanders who had survived the battle. He had been forced to relay the impossible details, to describe weapons that should not exist, tactics that defied conventional warfare, and a fleet that had no equal. The High Warlords listened in stunned silence. These were not beings who feared war. They had overseen the destruction of entire species, the subjugation of countless worlds, the crushing of rebellions before they could even begin. But as Krasvar recounted the battle, a new emotion gripped them. Something they had never known before: terror. The battle had lasted mere hours. The casualties had been in the billions. The pride of the Dominion, its war fleets, its legendary behemoths, had been annihilated in what could only be described as a mere demonstration. And the most horrifying truth of all? The humans had not even tried. One warlord, his voice barely above a whisper, broke the silence. Are we certain this was their real fleet? Krasvar's mandibles clicked shut. The answer was already known, and it sent shivers through the room. No, we are not certain. We have every reason to believe this was merely their conventional force. The room darkened. This was a council chamber meant for strategizing, for the meticulous planning of wars that spanned centuries. And yet, for all their military genius, they had no strategy for this. Another warlord spoke. If this was not their full force, then where is it? What else are they hiding? Silence. The intelligence officers, some of the best minds in the Dominion, had been working frantically to uncover what they could of human military doctrine. What they found only deepened the fear. The human fleet that had engaged them was formidable beyond reason. But there were records, scattered whispers, from other civilizations, of ships that were never seen, only felt. Battles that left no survivors. Space itself darkened in places where human warships had been rumored to operate. And then came the worst revelation of all. Humanity did not call their greatest weapons ships, they called them judgment fleets. The records were sparse, more myth than fact. There were reports from ancient empires that no longer existed, civilizations that had once thrived, only to vanish without a trace. What little information remained spoke of anomalies, unexplained disappearances, entire fleets lost in moments. A single intercepted communication from a human deep space transmission contained a phrase that sent chills through the Zorvash Council. Judgment Fleet does not conquer, it erases. The implications were beyond terrifying. For centuries, the Zorvash Dominion had believed themselves the dominant force in the galaxy. They had laughed at the notion that humanity could ever pose a threat. They had mocked their supposed isolation, believing them to be weak. But now, they understood. Humanity had never been in hiding. They had simply been waiting to see if the rest of the galaxy would be worth saving. The Zorvash had failed that test. Now, the Dominion was left with an impossible decision. Should they attempt diplomacy? Could they even risk contacting humanity again? What if reaching out provoked them? For all their power, the humans had remained an enigma. They had shown restraint. They had refused to press their advantage. But why? What were they waiting for? Krasvar stood, his voice steady but hollow. We must vanish from their sight. We will erase all records of this battle. We will act as if humanity does not exist. The warlords looked at him, their pride fighting against their terror. It was unthinkable. The Zorvash had never feared any species before. They had never chosen submission. But this was not a war they could fight. They had seen only the surface of what humanity was capable of, and what lay beneath was something no empire could ever hope to survive. As the council chamber dimmed, the Zorvash Dominion, the once mighty conquerors of the galaxy, did something they had never done before. They retreated. They erased every record of the war. They recalled every scout, every diplomat, every soldier who had even spoken the name of humanity. They abandoned entire sectors of space, leaving them untouched, unmonitored. And in the blackness of space, where no one could hear, they whispered, a silent prayer. That humanity would never look their way again. For the first time in the history of the Zorvash Dominion, the word surrender had been uttered without a single challenge. The warlords, the conquerors, the supreme rulers of 1,000 subjugated species, beings who had never known defeat, were now reduced to terrified strategists, planning not for victory, but for survival. And yet, for all their fear, they could not escape the weight of their own arrogance. The plan was simple in theory: erase all knowledge of humanity, withdraw from contested sectors, and pretend that the war had never happened. They would make no further incursions into human space, abandon their conquests in the outer fringes, and restructure their entire civilization around not attracting attention. But there was a problem. The Zorvash Dominion was not a unified empire. It was a war machine fueled by expansion, held together by the iron grip of its warlords. And warlords do not rule by fear of others, they rule by fear of their own kind. To suggest retreat was one thing. To enforce it across the Dominion's vast network of client races, subjugated worlds, and rival factions, that was another matter entirely. Dissent was inevitable. Within days of the decision to withdraw, fractures had already begun to form. Lesser warlords, seeing the High Council paralyzed by fear, began whispering in darkened chambers. The Dominion had never backed down from an enemy before. If the warlords would not lead, others would rise in their place. It started in the outer sectors. Ambitious commanders, refusing to believe the reports of the catastrophic defeat, dismissed the rumors as exaggeration. To them, Krasovar and his surviving officers were cowards. Disgraced warriors who sought to cover up their own failure with wild tales of human supremacy. One warlord in particular, the ruthless and ambitious Vokral the Unyielding, saw the withdrawal as an opportunity. If the Dominion was afraid to engage humanity, then it was weak, and if it was weak, then it was time for a new ruler. Vokral had never feared battle. He had built his power through raw brutality, crushing his rivals in open combat and seizing entire fleets through sheer force of will. He commanded legions of loyal warriors, ships the size of moons, and a mind sharpened by centuries of war, and unlike the Council, he wanted to test humanity for himself. Ignoring the Council's orders, Vokral mobilized his forces. He would lead a punitive expedition into human space. Not for conquest, but for knowledge. He did not believe in the impossible defeat the High Warlords feared. The only way to know the truth was to see it firsthand. His fleet was formidable, one of the largest assembled since the war. 100 capital ships, 10,000 strike craft, and a force so overwhelming that even the strongest Dominion vassals would have surrendered without a fight. With no warning, no formal declaration, and no attempt at communication, Vokral entered the sole exclusion zone, one of the restricted sectors declared off-limits by the High Warlords. His fleet vanished within 5 minutes. There were no distress calls, no escape pods, no wreckage, no survivors, just silence. It was as if the entire armada had been plucked from existence. The Dominion, for all its military brilliance, had no explanation. No sensor data, no trace of the battle, no way to understand what had happened. One moment Vokral's fleet was there, the next it was gone. But then, something worse happened. A transmission arrived, not a warning, not a threat, just a single message, broadcast on all Dominion frequencies, in a voice that was unmistakably human. We told you not to come. That was it. No declaration of war, no show of force. No fleets appearing in Dominion space, just a reminder. Reminder that they were watching. The impact was immediate. The Dominion collapsed in on itself like a dying star. Factions turned on each other. Warlords, once united by the promise of eternal conquest, now saw weakness everywhere. If humanity had the power to erase fleets without effort, then the entire foundation of the Dominion was meaningless. Panic spread like wildfire. Dissenters were executed. Some warlords fled, abandoning their fleets and disappearing into the void, hoping to escape whatever wrath might be coming. Others turned their weapons inward, launching preemptive purges to secure their own rule. Civil war was inevitable. And all the while, humanity remained silent. They did not invade. They did not conquer. They did not issue demands. They simply existed. And that was enough. For centuries, the Zorvash Dominion had laughed at the idea that humanity could be a threat. They had seen them as primitive, weak, insignificant. But now they did not laugh. Now they prayed. Because for the first time, they understood the real truth. Humanity did not see war as conquest. They saw it as a last resort. And the galaxy had come dangerously close to seeing what would happen if they ever crossed that line. The Zorvash Dominion collapsed within months. What was once an unshakable empire, built on the bones of the weak, fractured under its own weight. The warlords, once proud and unstoppable, now turned on one another in a desperate bid for survival. Some clung to the crumbling remains of their fleets, hoping to maintain power through sheer brutality. Others disappeared into the void, abandoning their worlds, their ships, and their very identities in an attempt to escape the inevitable. And all the while, humanity remained silent. That silence was worse than any battle, worse than any invasion. It was calculated. It was merciless. It was a reminder that the humans did not need to strike the final blow, because they had already won. The Dominion had always thrived on fear. It was how they controlled their subjugated species, how they maintained their vast empire. But now, the fear was turned inward. Fear of humanity. Fear of the unknown weapons they wielded. Fear of a fleet that no one had truly seen, yet everyone knew existed. Even those who had never faced humanity in battle understood one simple truth. If the humans ever decided to finish what had been started, the Dominion would not survive. But that day never came. No human ships arrived in Zorvash space. No troops descended on their worlds. No demands were made. Instead, the Dominion's enemies, those who had been enslaved, subjugated, and conquered for generations, rose in open rebellion. The fragile power structure shattered as entire civilizations took their revenge on their former overlords. The Dominion's vast territories fell like dominoes, not because of human intervention, but because the illusion of their superiority had been broken. And in the shadows, humanity watched. Some believed the humans would capitalize on the Dominion's fall, that they would seize the abandoned war fleets, claim the lost territories, and establish themselves as the next great galactic power. But they didn't. They simply observed, studied, and prepared. Because if there was one thing the humans had learned from history, it was that power itself was a burden. Conquest bred resentment. Empire demanded control, and humanity had no interest in ruling a broken galaxy. Instead, they reinforced their borders. They expanded their hidden fleet. They advanced their technology at a terrifying pace, and they waited for the next warlord, the next empire, the next fool who would look at Earth and think it was an easy target. Because now, the galaxy knew the truth. Humanity was not a species of conquerors. They were a species of warriors. They did not seek war. But when war came to them, they ended it so decisively that their enemies could no longer exist in the same form. The Dominion had laughed at humanity. They had dismissed them, mocked them, underestimated them, and in the end, they had destroyed themselves out of fear. Because humanity did not fight wars in the way the galaxy understood them. They did not conquer. They did not enslave. They did not boast. They simply ended wars. And if the rest of the galaxy was wise, they would make sure humanity never needed to do it again. Did you enjoy this story? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to hear more thrilling tales of humanity's unstoppable might, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The galaxy has only just begun to understand what we're capable of. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.